The sky has witnessed countless warriors, but only a few have carried the kind of mystery, power, and fear that the Martin B-57 Canberra brought with it. This was not just a bomber. This was the silent shadow that moved above enemy lines, the hunter that struck before anyone even realized it was there. And today, on Wings of War, you're about to enter the world of one of America's most underrated but deadliest combat jets ever built. So tighten your belts, focus your eyes, and prepare for a journey through the legacy of the real king of the silent skies. Before we begin, welcome to Wings of War, the channel where the roar of engines meets the fire of history. If you love fighter jets, legendary battles, and aviation stories that change the world, then you are in the right place. Now, let's unlock the story of the jet that flew higher, struck harder, and survived missions that should have been impossible, the Martin B-57 Canberra. The Martin B-57 didn't start as an American design. Its roots began across the Atlantic, where the British-built English electric Canberra was stunning the world with its performance. At a time when jets were still new and many countries were struggling to understand their true potential, the Canberra broke altitude records, smashed speed barriers, and operated with reliability that shocked engineers. The U.S. Air Force took notice, and soon, America decided not only to adopt it but to transform it into something even more powerful. Thus began the creation of the Martin B-57, an aircraft redesigned, re-engineered, and reborn to dominate American skies and future battlefields. From the outside, the B-57 looked sleek, long, and almost peaceful, until you stood beneath it and realized how much firepower it carried. This bomber was a predator wrapped in elegance. It could fly high enough to avoid detection, dive low enough to strike with deadly precision, and maneuver with surprising agility for a jet of its size. But its real secret weapon wasn't only its performance, it was its flexibility. The B-57 could perform bombing runs, reconnaissance missions, night intrusions, electronic warfare, and even nuclear strike duties. One aircraft, multiple roles, no excuses. When the B-57 entered service with the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s, America was preparing for a world of fear, Cold War tension, nuclear threats, and conflicts that could ignite without warning. The U.S. needed an aircraft that could launch fast, strike fast, and disappear just as quickly. The B-57 became exactly that weapon. It wasn't loud like the B-52. It wasn't massive like the B-36. But it was fast, sharp, and deadly. It slipped into hostile zones like a ghost, delivered destruction, and returned home before enemy radar even realized it had passed overhead. But its true moment of glory came during the Vietnam War. The jungles of Vietnam were unforgiving. Enemy forces were hidden in caves, forests, and mountains. Visibility was low. Danger was everywhere. Large bombers couldn't always maneuver effectively in these dense and unpredictable combat zones. But the B-57 could. It was the perfect weapon for night operations, the kind of missions that separated ordinary pilots from legends. Under darkness, the B-57 became a flying shadow, a jet so silent during high-altitude approach that enemies barely heard it until explosives lit up the ground beneath them. The B-57 pilots who flew night intruder missions became famous for their deadly accuracy. They tracked enemy convoys, supply routes, and troop movements using sensors long before drones existed. They fired when no one expected them. They struck when the enemy felt safest. And sometimes, they flew so low in the darkness that even the jungle trees shivered from the shockwaves. One of the most astounding things about the Martin B-57 Canberra was how well it handled extreme punishment. Pilots often returned with holes in their wings, damage to their fuselage, and systems that looked impossible to repair. Yet the B-57 kept flying. It kept fighting. It refused to die. In many battles, the B-57 wasn't just a bomber, it was a survivor. A machine built to take hits and deliver hits twice as hard. As the Vietnam conflict intensified, the B-57 became even more valuable. It worked alongside forward air controllers, supported ground troops, and destroyed enemy positions with devastating precision. Its bombing accuracy gave American forces a critical advantage during some of the toughest phases of the war. And its reconnaissance variants delivered life-saving intelligence that shaped entire operations. But there was one version that truly shocked the world, the RB-57F. This monster of a jet had enormous wings, powerful engines, and the ability to reach incredible altitudes, so high that it nearly touched the edges of space. These aircraft carried sensors that scanned thousands of miles and monitored nuclear tests, missile launches, and enemy communications. For years, much of its missions remained classified. Even today, aviation experts consider the B-57F one of the greatest reconnaissance platforms ever created. Despite its success, the B-57's story is also filled with danger, courage, and sacrifice. Many pilots flew into missions knowing that radar-guided enemy fire could lock onto them at any moment. Others risked their lives flying low-level strikes in mountainous regions where a single mistake meant death. But they continued. Because the B-57 wasn't just a machine, it was a promise. A promise to protect troops on the ground. A promise to defend freedom. A promise to complete the mission no matter what. As technology evolved, jets like the F-111 and F-4 Phantom began taking over many of the B-57's roles. Eventually, the mighty Canberra retired from frontline service. But its legacy did not end. For decades, NASA continued using modified B-57s for atmospheric research and high-altitude missions, proving that even after military retirement, this aircraft still had unmatched capabilities. Few jets in history have lived such a long and diverse life. But the Canberra did, and it did it with pride. Today, when aviation fans discuss legendary jets, they often mention the F-16, the F-15, the MiG-29, or the Su-35. But hidden behind these giants is a silent warrior who shaped modern air combat more than people realize. The Martin B-57 Canberra was a jet ahead of its time. A design so successful that even decades later, it's still admired by engineers and historians. And while it may not roar at airshows today, its shadow still flies across military history like a reminder of the days when one aircraft changed the game. This aircraft proved that firepower doesn't always come with noise. Speed doesn't always need to be celebrated. And legends don't always demand attention. Some simply rise, dominate, and leave behind a legacy that echoes across the sky long after they're gone. The Martin B-57 Canberra was one of those legends, a true king of the silent battlefield, a ghost of war, and one of the most underrated but powerful machines America ever sent into combat. So the next time you look up at the sky, remember the jet that owned the darkness. Remember the aircraft that delivered devastation with precision. Remember the quiet warrior that shaped air combat during some of the most intense conflicts in history. The Martin B-57 Canberra didn't just fly missions, it defined them. And that is why it remains, to this day, one of the real kings of the sky.